So yeah, hi everybody. So I have got a short kind of few slides um before we go into the discussion. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to do this. So as Daniel has already introduced me, I'll just jump straight in. I'm Rachel. I'm here with Colin today. Colin is one of our volunteer shed ambassadors. We'll come to Colin after the presentation, and we also have another volunteer and one of our trustees actually who's joined the call tonight. So he's not off the hook. I think he will be also involved in the discussion later. Um, our volunteer shed ambassadors are people who have got experience of starting and running sheds, and they really help us to support sheds out there to become developed. So people will have an idea about starting a shed, and our ambassadors are the ones who've done it before, who can kind of support them through the process and give them a bit of confidence. That's what they do, experienced shedders. So thank you, Colin and John, for joining us. Okay, so I'm going to start right at the top. So I'm assuming some of you will know what a men's shed is, and I'm assuming some of you may not know what a men's shed is. And some of you may have a bit of idea, but not be quite sure. So if you've come here with no knowledge, hopefully you'll go away with plenty. So men's sheds are generally physical spaces. They're in communities. They're for people in the community to access. They're not garden sheds that people go to by themselves. The thing that sheds have in common is that there's some kind of social element and there's some kind of doing element. So whether it's, we'll come to the doing element in a minute, but it could be some kind of craft or other activities. But generally, it's not just a talking group. It's people getting together to do things, and also have a social element as well. So it's not just a production line. They're not just churning out products for kind of jobs or for people. People can go there just to enjoy meeting others as well. One of the things that we always hear sheds described as are safe spaces. So they're places where people can go, speak to others. They can kind of seek out company if that's what they're after, or they can go in, they can get on with their work and their projects or their, the thing that they want to make, and kind of have that as their main focus. It's kind of sheds can be kind of whatever somebody's looking for from them. We hear that, sheds are a great support of health and well-being. This is one of the, the reasons, I guess, why we're here tonight. Oh, sorry, my cat is meowing around my feet. I don't know if anybody can hear that, but please excuse, I'm trying to ignore her. Sheds can support health and well-being. So some of the things that we know about sheds is that when people attend them regularly, they can feel more connected to their community. They can feel less anxious, less depressed, and less isolated as well. They're places where you can go to share skills. So if you've got skills to share, if you are one of the people who know how to do stuff, you can go to a shed and you can teach others how to do stuff. If you're one of the people that don't know how to do stuff, you can go to a shed and you can come away learning how to do stuff. Shed members will really kind of vary in skills upon joining. Sometimes people are drawn to sheds because they may have been in a trade or a role or kind of job for their life, and they'll have a skill that they want to share. So they could be, sometimes it could be things like engineering or, as I say, trades, kind of carpentry, joinery, kind of whatever. But sheds are not places that you have to worry about going to if you've never done it before. Very welcoming spaces where people can go and they will learn how to do things. And I know in Daniel's introduction, he talks about sheds for every man that wants one. Ideally, we'd like sheds for every person that wants one as well. Sheds were kind of originally set up as a concept to promote the health and well-being of men, but they're not just for men. So if you're kind of watching this talk or you came along to this thinking, well, what about women or other people, sheds are not just for men. Many sheds will have a mixed membership, and that's something that the sheds decide themselves. But there are reasons why sheds were kind of started to support men's health and well-being. I'll come to that in a minute. So what goes on in a shed? So briefly kind of touched on this. As I say, there is usually a social element and a doing kind of element. Often sheds will kind of dabble in woodwork or craft. That is kind of predominantly the thing that we see, but it's not always the case. And sometimes, when you talk about sheds to somebody, they may kind of say, "Oh, I'm not into woodwork. I've never done that before." It's quite rare that a shed will only do something like work. There are sheds out there that do things like cookery, um, creative writing, other crafts, things like pyrography, mosaics, art, bicycle repair, so all kinds of things, kind of you name it, there'll be a shed doing it. Um, and community projects are a really big part of sheds as well. So sheds, it's again very rare that you'll go to a shed and that the people in the shed will be purely working on kind of items or making things for themselves. Generally, there's community element and a lot of community involvement, and that can spark some real creativity in sheds, I think. Sheds, as I've said, they are within their communities and they're generally started by people in their communities. So it will be a small group of people who've come together and decided to start a shed. Um, so each shed will look completely different depending on the community that they're in and the needs of that community. The people that make up the shed, their skills and experience. And sometimes the projects that come from the communities themselves, so people kind of in the area asking for things, are really kind of interesting. So a good example of that, I think, is the Skiot car, which was produced by a shed in Dalbeattie in Scotland. The story behind this was that the shed were contacted by the family of a maker who in the 1920s created a car, a model of a car, which went into production, and only a handful were made before the factory burnt down. Down the line, the family of this car maker that had these 100-year-old plans and no cars in existence saw the shed on TV and approached them and said, "We've got these plans of our great great granddad. Do you think you could make this car?" And the shed said, "Okay, yeah, we'll give it a go." And they produced a car that's drivable. It has a motorbike engine which it runs from. You can sit in it, you can drive it. I don't think you're allowed to drive it on a road, but it does go. And it was just an absolutely incredible project for them to make. It's really a piece of real kind of craftsmanship, and that involved all different skills from the shed members. Really kind of came from that community. Kind of, the shed may not have produced a car otherwise. It was a really, really interesting one. So there'll be things like that. Sheds will be asked to make things for schools, care homes, hospitals, planters to sit outside a supermarket, kind of you name it. People are approaching sheds and asking them to do things. In rural areas as well, there's quite often an element of conservation or supporting the environment. So that will be things like bird boxes, bat boxes, bug boxes, anything that wants to go in a box, it can have a box. So that they will be projects that sheds will often undertake as well. And then there's repair as well. So some sheds will do things, some bicycle repair, but sometimes it's, restoration of items or repairing, things like village signs, or items in the community, bins, benches, whatever. Sheds will do that as well. Cups of tea, coffee, hot drinks, food. That's the kind of social element. So it's not just about work in sheds. There will always be this kind of social element. Every shed you go to will have a kettle. Kettle will be on at some point. And many sheds will kind of make time for the members to sit down and have a cup of tea together, have a chat if people want to, and kind of be in that informal kind of environment as well. So there is the real social element to sheds. So the question of kind of what goes on in a shed, absolutely anything and everything, really. So just a very brief bit of background in case you're unfamiliar with us. Daniel did give a good introduction before. The shed kind of movement and the concept started in Australia. And as I mentioned before, it really was kind of born to support the health and well-being of predominantly retired men. So kind of people who were isolated, retired farmers who had, vast distances between each other and lost a lot of social contact once they kind of retired or gave up their farming or ranching or whatever it was they were doing. So there's a lot of sheds in Australia, and obviously now in Britain as well. We are catching up. We are a charity, as Daniel said. We are a member organisation as well, and we're here to support and promote sheds and the shed movement, and also kind of men's mental health and well-being as well. Back in 2013, when sheds were kind of in their infancy, there was around 30 sheds across the UK, but today we've got over 1,100 open sheds. So really, the rate of growth is really incredible. We've been a charity since 2015, and we were created really to support sheds that were starting up. The same questions were kind of arising. People were having the same challenges or were looking for the same information, and that's why we were created really to. And it really has grown an awful lot. Okay, so just to touch on a little bit about kind of why sheds are needed. One of the things that we hear a lot is that people find sheds when they've gone through some big life changes. Not everybody, some people, might find a shed because they're looking to fill up some time or to finish a project or learn how to make something. But some people will find sheds because they've been through something, and that could be something like retirement for a lot of people. So, when somebody retires, potentially they are losing things like their routine, their social connection around them, their purpose. Sometimes, people's careers can be really tied up in their identity, especially if you've worked as a in one kind of role or job your entire life. Retirement, bereavement, people who've lost partners, friends, if you've moved to another area and you don't know anybody, if you're going through some kind of health condition, if you've lost your job, if you've been made redundant, if you've had experienced financial changes as well, and you're kind of that's impacted the way that you socialize or the way that you may connect with others, or impacted your hobbies that you once did. These are all kind of reasons why people may be looking for something from a shed. We do hear that a lot. Loneliness. So, sheds out there exist and they do support people who are lonely or who are socially isolated. Not everybody who goes to a shed feels that they're lonely or socially isolated, but they can make new connections and new friends by going to a shed. And there is a link between loneliness and mental health. If you are lonely, you're more likely to experience poor mental health. And loneliness can also impact your physical health as well, with being more at risk of cognitive decline and coronary diseases as well. So loneliness can have an impact. And sheds are one way that people can kind of address that if they're looking to connect with others more. That community connection as well, I think, is important. As I've said about the community projects, it's nice for people to give back to the people around them. So shedders will really enjoy kind of seeing things like planters in use. They produce things for schools, whether it's, a mud kitchen or something for the playground, whatever it is. And to kind of have that feedback of children using them, people enjoying them, so-and-so sitting on the picnic bench that we've made. I think it can add a real kind of sense of achievement, kind of positive well-being, I think, is comes from that. Men also, unfortunately, are less likely to access some forms of support, so less likely to see their GP and less likely to access things like NHS talking therapies. But they might chat to somebody in a shed. So again, this is where sheds come in. They offer a real kind of informal support. They're there, for the projects, for the cups of tea, for the turning up and having a laugh, but also a lot of useful information does get shared in sheds informally, organically. Quite often people will speak to others about things that they're going through or experiencing or looking for information on. And chances are there's somebody in the shed who's experienced something similar or knows somebody that has, whether that's, support with benefits, worried about going for a prostate cancer screening, got raised blood pressure, whatever it might be, there's usually somebody there that's gone through it and will chat to you about it. That outside of a clinical setting, I think can be a lot more approachable for people to have these kind of conversations. So social prescribers tend to like men's sheds. People can go there and they will often come away with useful information and people to support them, new friends around them. Some sheds also kind of really kind of tap into the health and well-being kind of side of things, and they will organize things like talks at their shed, whether that's from kind of health professionals or local services. Some sheds will have nurses come in, test people's blood pressure, or give away like step pedometers or whatever it is, encouraging healthy lifestyle, or give out information. So sheds kind of can pick or choose how involved they want to be in that. But I think the real kind of magic of it is that informality. People can go and you can talk if you want. If you don't want to, you don't have. I'll put alcohol on here as well. So alcohol, sheds are an alternative to alcohol. All sheds will have a no alcohol, no drugs policy. And actually public health data has showed that men aged 55 to 74 drink more than any other age group. So men potentially can be at risk of spending their time drinking alcohol. And if they're looking for an alternative to that, sheds is a good alternative. And then the statistic that some of you may have heard before is that 76% of all suicides are men. So it's, a really kind of shocking statistic. And, I think sheds actively recognise that they can save lives. Many sheds will have stories about people who've gone along, and maybe they've been there for a couple of months and then they've opened up and told somebody that actually when they joined, they were in a place where they were feeling suicidal. We did a health and wellbeing survey last year, which went out to shed leaders, and that showed us that 39% of sheds believe that they think that they may have saved a life, their members. So we had responses from that ranging from people who said, somebody had opened up to them about it, and we had responses saying, yes, that person was me. So it was very impactful. And I think it kind of goes a long way in showing the real impact that sheds can have, from seemingly, something so simple. It's, getting together, it's making stuff and it's having a cup of tea, and it can make a very big difference. Okay, so last few slides, kind of why sheds work. So this is a bit of an analogy that we use. So we use it a lot. And it's really kind of a good way of explaining why sheds work. This was kind of created by one of our volunteer ambassadors, actually. So he kind of said, well, if you put 12 men in a room and you ask them to talk about their feelings, then 6 are going to, leave immediately. They don't want to do it. And the other 6 will just try and find the corners of the room and kind of ignore what's going on. But if you give them a broken lawnmower and say, can anybody ever go at fixing this? In a couple of hours, the men are going to know probably all about each other. They will be chatting away. They're going to know about their grandkids, their skills, how they have their cups of tea, and maybe about some of the problems that they're going through. And you may even get a fixed lawnmower. That's the punchline to that. So yes, it's really the kind of way we describe it is as talking shoulder to shoulder. Often people find it easier to open up about things when they're not having to look somebody kind of directly in the face and being asked about how they feel. I think it's a lot easier to kind of be engaged in an activity, and feel, the confidence to kind of mention something. As I say, these conversations will happen organically, that it's not a talking group. There's not somebody there kind of directly asking about how you're feeling today or whatever it is. It's very much a kind of talk if you want to, and there's people there to listen if you do. This is a really short video. It's just a little example of a real shedder, Pete from Broadstairs Town Shed, um, just kind of talking about his brief experience of it.
It was getting too easy to watch rubbish telly all morning and then, oh, I'll just pop up the road and get a tin of beans for me tea. Oh, I'll just pop in the pub and have a couple of pints. All of a sudden it's 5 pints and another lost afternoon. Then the shed came along. Shed really has been my saviour. If it wasn't for the shed, I would probably be drunk in a gutter now.
They're amazing. I think that men traditionally really struggle with their feelings, and I think through the men's sheds that just brings men together, doing things that men like to do and continue with hobbies that maybe that they've dropped off because they have lost friendships and become isolated.
I don't know if anybody else's video was a bit slow there. They kind of were talking in slow motion, but the sound was okay. So hopefully you kind of heard all of that. And yeah, just an example from Pete about how he, was finding alcohol, I suppose, and the shed was an alternative to that.
It was getting too easy.
Sorry, I'm trying to get to the next slide.
It was getting...
There we go. Sorry. Okay, so this slide is just I've just thrown a few photographs together here. Just, we're talking about well-being, we're talking about craft. I thought here's some pictures of people smiling, doing things in sheds. And Daniel, you might spot the coracle at the top. That was actually Shrewsbury Men's Shed did a project which came about through kind of heritage crafts and a link that we have with one of the sheds, Dave. So this basically, just an example of some of the creativity that sheds kind of get involved in. We're looking for sheds to undertake this coracle project, and this was Shrewsbury Men's Shed. Again, very kind of linked with their kind of community and heritage. They made Shrewsbury coracles. In fact, I was there, actually made a Shrewsbury coracle as well. So they made these coracles in order to preserve this, endangered craft, really. And since then, the shed have actually gone on to arrange further coracle workshops. They've entered a coracle regatta. They entered, I think, 2 different competitions. So they really have kind of embraced it and kind of gone with that. But again, that's kind of come from something, related to their kind of unique community and the history of Shrewsbury, the links with heritage crafts as well. And yeah, there's just people on here obviously having a nice time, having a laugh is really is, what sheds about, kind of what we're all about. And then just to touch on as well, a couple of things that you may kind of be wondering about, which I thought would be useful to mention. So sometimes people will say, well, who decides, what the sheds do or what time they're open or what days they're open. And the answers to that is the sheds decide themselves. So we don't govern the sheds. The sheds are all independent, autonomous entities. Some of them are registered charities themselves. So they will all be open different days of the week, different times, depending on the needs in their community, the members' availability, all the things like that, the time they've got to give. So they make their own rules. They will all be very different. I've touched on this already. Are women allowed in sheds? Yes, a lot of sheds will have a mixed membership where people of any gender are allowed to attend. As I said, all sheds are different, so it's best to check with the shed. But I think sheds, I've seen an increase in people wanting to attend, different people wanting to attend. And some of the sheds will kind of manage this in different ways. So some of them will have mixed sessions. Some of them will keep men only sessions because they recognize that for them, men may be more likely to open up if they're just around other men, talk about those kind of problems that they might not share if there's women there. But as I say, all sheds are different and they will manage this in different ways. But I think there is a real kind of recognition that things like men's sheds can support the well-being of anybody, not just men. And sheds really kind of are adapting to that and thinking of ways to be open to everybody in their community. Oh no, this is not the last one. Our shed's just for older people. I know I've talked a little bit about kind of retiree age people. But sheds really are not just for older people. You may find or older people in sheds, as often they are open kind of weekdays, middle of the day, which kind of lends itself to people who've got a bit more time, who might be retired. But a lot of sheds now, again, are considering things like evenings, weekends, and they will generally have a few younger members. When I say younger, I kind of mean, people of working age. Most sheds operate at over 18s policy. Some sheds will do stuff with younger members, whether that's with schools or kind of supervised kind of activities. But I'd say most sheds operate in 18 plus policy, but again, with shed. And then last question that we often get asked is, are men's sheds suitable for people with additional needs? So again, there's no way to kind of possibly answer this for all sheds. Sheds will be very different. Some sheds will run specific sessions to work with different groups of people. So people living with dementia or autism are examples of that. Some sheds will have varying levels of accessibility, wheelchair access. Some of them won't be that accessible. Most sheds, I would say, offer kind of discretionary kind of financial contributions as well. So sheds will often charge a small fee to attend, but if people are kind of in financial troubles, sheds are often quite good at discretionary kind of people's different circumstances. It shouldn't be a barrier for people attending a shed. So again, check with each shed. They may be suitable for different. And this is just final kind of quote. This is a guy, Addy, who's from Norfolk, who, talked about the troubles he was facing, and when he found the shed, he compared it, almost to a computer. He said, come in, been repaired, given upgrades, I'm a different person. And he credited the shed really with kind of saving, as he kind of put it, the relationship with his wife and his daughter. He was in a bad place, and found a real kind of respite in the shed. And yeah, different person from attending. So real kind of positive story. And then I think we've just got our website. So I think Daniel's or Gareth was going to put it in the chat. But if you're interested in finding a shed, we have a map. You can put your postcode in or your area, and it will throw up all the sheds in your vicinity with kind of brief information about them as well. So the opening times, how to contact them. If you're interested in starting a shed, we've got information on there, which you can have a look at as well. So yes, have a look at the website. And that's the end of my presentation. So the end.
Thanks very much for that, Rachel. That was really interesting. I don't know, there's been some chat in the chat, and I'll head over to Daniel to ask some of those. But if I wanted to ask something, first of all, to you and to Colin, and John as well, if he wants to answer, because I'm aware that there are a lot of craft groups who are already benefiting from the thing that you said about the fact that if you're working on something and you're not making eye contact, it's just so much easier to talk and share things, and everyone can benefit from that. But I know that some craft groups might be struggling to get men through the door. Now, obviously, you've got the word men's as a title, which is already an in. Any sort of thoughts or tips for people running a craft group, trying to encourage more men in terms of the kind of language they use, the photos they might use in publicity, whether or not a buddying system can help, or also literally what kind of crafts they do during the session that might encourage men through the door?
Ooh. Colin, do you want to go? Oh, sorry, I didn't introduce Colin. I'll just quickly introduce Colin. So Colin Fleet is our ambassador from Northern Ireland. He's from Saintfield Men's Shed. And Colin runs the shed and also does a lot of kind of support for us as well. So Colin, I don't know if you want to say hi.
Yeah. Thanks, Rachel. I think you covered everything there about Men's Shed. Yeah, I'm from a men's shed in Northern Ireland. We started in about 2018. You were saying about how to get people in. Sometimes we'll get people come and say, "Oh, really? I can't do this, and I've got no skills." But we try and sort of encourage them and say it's not really skills that we're looking for, physical skills. It's life skills, because we do have some younger members, and they're very interested in listening to the older chaps talk about their work career and what they've achieved. So skills are varying, I think. You know, I mean, we can't all pick up a screwdriver and repair something, but some people are natural to it. So I think the main thing is not to frighten them off for a start off, sort of say, well, come along and see what you can do, and we'll teach you the bits that you want to learn, you know.
I was going to say maybe maybe things like do sometimes kind of things like taster sessions or something where it's, you know, a specific thing of, I know you've never done this before and it seems like a, you know, an unusual thing that you might want to do, but come and give it a go. Everybody's new here.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Sometimes I know sheds will do that sometimes.
Yeah, what we tend to do is we'll get a guy and he'll say, well, I've never done any turning. I wouldn't even have an idea how to do it. And basically, we try and get them on that day. We'll teach them the right or the right way to do it, and what they shouldn't do for safety's sake. And normally by the end of the day, they'll walk home with a pen that they've made, and really that's the start of them. Then if they take it home, and the next week I've got to make another 3 of those. So if you can get them in to make something, and they walk home with it 3 or 4 hours later, it's a great achievement.
Yeah. I think you mentioned like images as well, and you know that I suppose that can be important as well if that's how you're advertising the groups, is, you know, people are drawn to things where, you know, you see someone like yourself in that group, and I guess for men that could be appealing. And yeah, definitely, you know, the word men's sheds, you know, some people kind of raise it with us, you know, why are we still called men's sheds when it's, you know, it is very much open to a lot, you know, wider audience than that. But I think it's because it gives people the in is one of the real reasons men know it's specifically for them. And it's something that's kind of accessible, I guess. John, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about how you get men in the door, or how a craft group might.
Well, the obvious things are advertising using active Facebook pages. I've been a member of Amersham Men's Shed for about 7 years now. I'm chairman there, and we've got about 20 members, and people come and go. People do leave, but most people seem to stay, and so we don't advertise much at all, because we're limited by the number of days we're open and the amount of physical space we have. We rent some workshop space and another small building which has got our social space in it. I think one of the things that's different about the men's shed movement to most other craft groups is that the majority of active men's sheds have their own premises, and some of them are very big indeed. In Scotland, Inverclyde Shed is worth a look. They took over a disused bus garage, raised £800,000, and turned it into a super shed that's open 6 days a week. 3 days a week, it's open 9 in the morning till 9 at night. They also run two separate community gardens in the town as well. And there's a few sheds like Shrewsbury's, not quite in the same league, but they're not far off, and there are other sheds too that have raised in excess of £200,000 over a period of years, and then converted buildings. In many cases, Scotland's a very good place. I know you're a Scottish charity, Creative Life.
Oh, we're not. We're everywhere. We're UK and Ireland. Just in case anyone thinks we're Scottish, we're not.
Yeah. But I know you're a Scottish charity. But Scotland, because of the right, I won't say right to buy, but the kind of creative reuse of older buildings is much more prevalent in Scotland than it is anywhere in England.
I was just going to quickly say, sorry, I was just really quickly say, I know you mentioned the buddy thing as well, and just the one other thing I was going to say was, sometimes people might like to be feeling that they're useful, or, you know, the kind of things I sometimes hear is that men might like to feel that they are useful. So if you're trying to get them to the craft group, maybe is there some other job that you could be asking them to do while they're there, in a kind of helping capacity? Sometimes that might be a way of getting people in the door, potentially sharing kind of their skills or abilities in some other way, and actually they stay with the craft and enjoy it.
And on the subject of the craft, just quickly,
Yeah, I think you've got to.
No, on you go. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think you've got to. Sometimes you have to find what the person really fits into. We had a couple of guys, and we could see that they really weren't interested in making planters and any of the big stuff, the benches and that. So I said to them one day, there's some pyrography kits there, why don't you have a go at that? Which they didn't even know what pyrography was. And now every week they're producing some beautiful boxes, and they do the art on them and everything. And it's really just a case of finding the niche that suits them, you know.
Thank you, Colin. Daniel, do you want to talk about some of the stuff that's in the chat? I know there's been lots of interesting comments.
Yeah, there's been some great engagement in the chat, so thank you everybody, and please do keep the questions coming. There's been lots of supportive comments, and we've also been hearing from people that either already involved in men's sheds or are thinking of setting something up or doing something with kind of similar characteristics, that they can see the similarities between what they're doing and what you're doing. But we've had some really good questions, and I'm going to draw some out. And on the topic of premises and venues, I was going to ask Gareth Simpson, do you want to unmute and ask your question for those who missed it in the chat?
Yes, of course. My name's Gareth. I work for the National Churches Trust. It's an arm's length heritage organisation that supports churches to stay open, churches and chapels. Churches and chapels, to stay relevant, need to do community engagement and more of it. They do a great deal already, and lots of aid work and social engagement activities. So I'm here to learn of what sheds might already exist in churches or chapels, either ones currently functioning as places of worship or ones that are now sort of asset transfer type items, that, you know, buildings that have moved on. So I'm interested in know what shedding is going on in any churches, if you know of any that I can use as case studies. And the flip side of that is, of course, I'd like to connect people with with churches and dioceses and structures above churches and chapels, just to make the offer to those property owners that, hey, you could put a shed in your church or chapel or space and it could be useful. We don't have any net churches, etc. ourselves. We are that sort of arm's length support body to offer help. So I want to make it another suggestion to the sector.
Yeah. I'll just give you a couple of examples off the top of my head, and then I'm sure John will have some useful info. But yeah, just a couple of examples of, I know that Nursling Men's Shed is in a church. John, can you remember if that one is active or not active? I think that might be.
Yeah, no, I believe that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got
Heaton Men's Shed. Yeah, Heaton in Greater Manchester, kind of Stockport area. They are underground in an active church, so they are basically kind of in the this kind of workshop space in the crypt. Yeah, in the crypt.
And same with Worcester.
And then Ripon, as you said, Ripon have just moved into a church as well. So yeah, there'll be plenty more.
We've got a couple around us in Northern Ireland in churches. The churches are actually very good to them. You know, they give them rooms to work in and everything. So
there's one near me actually as well in Bebington on the Wirral, and they're on the church grounds, and they have, so their shed is kind of shed structure, which is basically the church, and there's a community centre next door, and they're kind of on the grounds, but they do stuff for the church. So quite a few will kind of do jobs for the church in exchange for kind of being there, you know, rent or free space or whatever it is. I know that Graham in Nursling, they kind of restored the area that they were given in that church. It was in a bad way, and they kind of maintained it and renovated it and maintain it now. So
that all sounds great. It might be you, Rachel, but maybe if we get in touch separately, you can do a pitch and I can get it out through our channels to try and get property owners to start thinking about men's sheds as a concept for their spaces.
Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you, Gareth. Yeah, I was going to suggest we can put you in touch afterwards, and you can do some mapping on the church-based men's sheds up and down the country. I think that would be really good. I was going to come to a question that Sarah Moorhead asked about some of the more kind of chronically isolated people within society and how we reach them. Sarah, did you want to voice that in your own words?
Yeah, we run whittling and wood carving sessions in our local community, and we do have a premises in Weardale, which is a small workshop. So it's really hard, you know, when you're talking about doing stuff, we haven't got enough room to do lots of workbenches and things like that. But we do struggle to get those guys who are really isolated. They're not on Facebook. It's a rural community. We're in touch with the social prescribers, but other than that, I'm not sure what other means that we can do to actually encourage other people to come out. I did like Kelly's idea of a buddy system. I think that sounds quite good.
One of the things that maybe could be potentially a possibility, just thinking of it, in Suffolk, they started something called Rural Coffee Caravan. There was something that existed called the Rural Coffee Caravan, and that was a, as it sounds, coffee van that would travel around rural communities, and they were finding that they didn't have many men accessing it. So it would go and give free tea and coffee, but it was all women that would turn up and have a cup of tea. And they were looking for ways to engage isolated men to come out and be part of this. So they joined with their local shed, or one of their local sheds, and they've started a kind of a pop-up mobile shed. It's called, I think it's called Suffolk Mobile Shed. And they now go around with kind of stuff in the boot of a car. So it's a workbench, it's a few, you know, things like flat pack bird boxes that they've kind of pieced together, and then people can finish it off, or, you know, a few kind of real basic stuff. And they found that they were getting quite a lot of engagement through having that available as well. So they were finding people weren't accessing sheds, you know, in Suffolk it can be quite rural. So they were kind of going to the people who were isolated. So potentially, I don't know if you may have the means to try anything like that. And sometimes I think, again, I've heard from sheds who, you know, will attend other events. So their group will go along to, you know, Christmas fair, whatever it is, and having a face, somebody who's there that somebody can connect with on the day and say, come to the shed because I'll be there, and, you know, I'll meet you when you come in, and, you know, you can come in and have a cup of tea with me. Sometimes that's, you know, getting over the threshold, we always hear, is the hardest thing for people to do. You know, people will, isolated people may, you know, they want to go, but they might walk past that shed 5 or 6 times and not build up the courage to go in. So it could even be, you know, really kind of having a face who they know is going to be there as a safe person, I suppose. Maybe an idea.
I had a question of my own. Rachel, you mentioned woodworking and repair as kind of common activities that happen in sheds, and I think Colin touched on that as well. I was wondering about some of the more unusual or esoteric or niche crafts that might have been taking place in sheds up and down the country. And we've got one of our members here, Phil Parks, who is a mail maker. Some of you might know it as chain mail. The kind of the medieval armor, but yeah, it's officially known as mail. And Phil, we saw you at the Shed Fest in Worcester.
Yeah, I was going to say
about
met
mail
Phil,
making to some of the sheds there. Have you had much interest of kind of a more unusual craft that
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with a couple of men's shed groups in South Wales. So over in Splot, there's a men's shed group who sort of invited me along to do a demonstration of mail making and things, and they just got a great interest from it, and basically that led to them sort of then coming along to my workplace at the time, which was Cardiff University, to look at the sort of conservation work I did. So my other sort of job is object conservation with museums and archaeological units, so it sort of fed into a lot of things. And interestingly, one of the things is they are a mixed group. So they've also done sort of work with weaving and things like this as well. So in particular, when we were looking at the sort of Egyptian sarcophagus, the coffin we had there, they were looking at the sort of Egyptian linen and sort of really interested in the sort of textile side of that. And I found I've also done a talk with Ponty Men's Shed, which what struck me was how different the groups can be. You know, it really is, they have their own sort of unique characters, which I found really interesting. And yeah, and again, you know, the Ponty Men's Shed, I suppose, was sort of more of a traditional mostly men sort of thing. But again, a lot of engineers, retired sort of metal workers and things like that, really interested in the craft aspect of what I was doing, and basically able to sort of really input some specialist knowledge in terms of some of the working techniques and things like that, which, you know, personally fed into some of the thoughts I'd been having, and was able to answer a couple of questions I'd had, because, you know, I'd not had the opportunity to speak to somebody who'd worked for 40 years with this type of material maybe, and then said, oh, well, have you thought this? And yeah, I just find it a really great experience, sort of, you know, the interacting with the group and also the feedback, you know, from just talking to them.
Fantastic. And
I think sorry, go on, Daniel.
I was just going to ask Colin if he's done any unusual crafts through his shed.
Not in our shed personally, but one of the sheds that I sort of go round, they decided to do a bit of flax growing, and then they got a bit of land and they grew the flax, and they took it right through to spinning it and turning it into linen. So that was quite a good project, because obviously flax growing was a big thing in Northern Ireland years ago, but very much dying out now. So yeah, they took it right the way through. They found a lady who could put it on the spinner for them, and they spun it into linen, and then I think they created a banner in the end just with it, all what they'd grown. So quite a good project.
Yeah, I think there's I think it really depends, as kind of Phil said, about, you know, the different members and their kind of skills and backgrounds. You know, it just takes somebody with an interest in something, or a past, you know, done something in a past life, and it can really kind of get something started at a shed. Also just other kind of stuff. I know, I think I mentioned some different stuff before, but there's definitely sheds that have made honey as well. What other stuff? Kind of, I think, as I've said, creative writing, make podcasts. There's sheds that do kind of audio things, there's sheds that do electronic things. Honestly, if you can think of it, it's probably happening. But yeah, that's a good example, like Colin, that linen, that was a really nice one.
Thank you, Rachel.
Sorry, could I ask a quick question, Rachel? I'm just aware of time. We have a group that won, we have the Creative Lives Awards each year, and we had a group that won last year based in Northern Ireland called the Kindness Postbox. And they were a group that would do visual art and storytelling, poetry and creative writing and stuff. And they would take like from children to care homes and vice versa. But they got the local men's shed involved to build the boxes that they went into. And there was a lovely collaboration there. And I'm just thinking that feels to me like a really good possibility for craft groups to think, well, okay, if we want more men, could you do a partnership with your local men's shed? I mean, presumably that must happen.
Yeah,
we do look into that. We're working with schools at the moment. We got a grant off ASDA and the project was for building material for schools. So we wrote out to all the primary schools within a 5-mile radius, and they've now put their order in as to what they would like. So it's good working with them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea. There's sheds, you know, as I said, that they're so connected in their communities. They will be involved in all kinds of different groups, whether it's, you know, things like schools, food banks, whatever, some other craft groups. So yeah, definitely, if you kind of looking for support from a shed as well, you know, there's a weird project that you don't know how else you might go about it, a shed will usually be the ones to take on that weird project and give it a go. Good idea.
I think approach your local men's shed is going to be the
yes,
all kinds of stuff, isn't it? Yeah.
Definitely. As Kelly mentioned, time's getting away from us, but I did quickly want to come back to Terry because I can see he's unmuted himself. And as well as your original point, Terry, you've made a subsequent one about the bureaucratic or red tape barriers to setting up a men's shed, which I think will be good to reflect on. Do you want to?
Yeah, I don't think we've got much time left, to be honest. But I mean, the project I did was back in 1994. I did it for Bernardo's Family Therapy Unit up in Liverpool, and they wanted to know why so few men presented for counselling. Most of their clients were women and children. They couldn't get the men through the door at all, and I basically sat down and said, "Well, I can give you the answer to that now." Basically, men are terrified of risking being vulnerable. I think it's less so today. I think things have improved societally a bit, but it's still got a long way to go. But yeah, and basically the conclusion was that you cannot just confront men directly like that. You have to find a roundabout way. And I got feedback from the Australian men's sheds movement back at that time as well. They were fairly new, but they were having quite a bit of success. And from their roots, basically, it spread right across the world gradually. But yeah, it's about the language used. I mean, a lot of men don't like to admit that they're lonely, so you can't use that. You've got to be kind of sort of circumspect about things with a lot of men out in local communities, and how you actually go about drawing them into a shed or anything like that.
Yeah.
The language is crucial, really. And at my rifle club, I call him a men's shed because we're all blokes of a certain age. There are some women shooters there, and they'll join in with the banter in the tea room afterwards. We tear each other to bits. It's just, we just rip each other to bits. One guy walked in the other day, greeted everybody, and I just told him to bugger off. But it was a laugh. It was a joke. I said, and everybody just fell about laughing, and he did as well. But it's kind of using that I use that gallows humour quite a lot to sort of defuse situations. Really, it's.
Thank you, Terry. I think you made a really important point. I'm just aware of time. But that kind of fear of vulnerability is something that we need to overcome. But very quickly then, Rachel, on that other point, is there a lot of bureaucracy in setting up a men's shed?
Well, there's certain, we want men's sheds to be safe places, and we want people to have all the information that they need. At the end of the day, it can be a dangerous environment if you don't know what you're doing or you've not got things in place. So, we do have information available, and, Colin, John, and our other volunteer ambassadors are available to give kind of one-on-one support. They're the people who've done it before. And, we do have guides about how to set things up. So, the information is out there, and we are kind of here to help. But yes, there's definitely things to consider. It's not just kind of willy-nilly kind of get everybody in and start chopping stuff up. Got to be safe. But yeah, we can help, and we would advise
and guidance
that.
there for a reason. But I think it comes back to our mantra: get in touch with the local men's shed, start talking to people, get in touch with you as a national organisation. There's support there to guide people through the process. Great, it's been absolutely fantastic. I'm going to come back to Kelly now to wrap up, or kind of tell us what we need to do before we can finish.
We can finish. Thank you so much, Rachel and Colin and John and everybody else who spoke. It's been so interesting. I think, as with anything else, making connections with other groups is always going to be the way to bring more people through the door, or make more interesting projects and connect and feel like you're part of a community. So thanks, Rachel, and people can look on the map, as you've mentioned, to find a men's shed near them, and who knows, could blossom some beautiful relationships between craft groups and men's sheds, or some new men's sheds popping up in new places like churches. Please do sign up for the Creative Lives newsletter, because in there you'll find out when the next Creative Network craft session is, and lots of other things besides that you might find interesting. Again, that's in the chat. But otherwise, thank you so much for being with us tonight. We appreciate your company, and I hope you had an interesting session, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime.